Robert Harrison stood in the center of his company's main server room watching 15 of his brightest engineers huddle around banks of humming computers. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across their worried faces as they typed frantically on keyboards and whispered urgent theories to each other. For 3 days now their revolutionary new software system had been crashing every 30 minutes like clockwork, and no one could figure out why. Robert was 57 years old and had built Harrison Tech from nothing more than a dream and a garage workspace 25 years ago. Now his company employed over 300 people, and their latest project was supposed to revolutionize how hospitals managed patient care. But here they were just 2 weeks before the biggest product launch of his career, and everything was falling apart. His daughter Emma was only 8 years old, and she was waiting for him at home as she did every evening. Since his wife Sarah had passed away from cancer 3 years ago, it had been just the two of them navigating life together. Emma would sit at the kitchen table doing her homework while he worked late into the night on his laptop trying to solve problems like this one. Mrs. Catherine Walsh had been their nanny for 2 years now, and Robert often wondered what he would have done without her steady presence in their lives. She was 62 years old with silver hair that she wore in a neat bun and kind blue eyes that seemed to see right through to the heart of things. Catherine had raised 4 children of her own and helped countless other families through the years. She had a way of making everything feel calmer just by walking into a room. Robert pulled out his phone and called home, knowing that Emma would be getting ready for dinner soon. "Hello, Mr. Harrison," Catherine answered on the second ring. "Catherine, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to be late again tonight," Robert said, running his hand through his graying hair. "The system is still crashing and we can't figure out what's wrong." "Oh my," Catherine replied in her gentle voice, "that does sound frustrating. Emma is finishing up her math homework and I've got a nice pot roast in the oven. Don't worry about us, we'll keep everything warm until you get home." Robert felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had missed so many dinners lately, and he could hear the understanding but also the slight disappointment in Catherine's voice. "Maybe I should just come home," he said quietly. "This problem isn't getting solved tonight anyway." "Nonsense," Catherine said firmly. "You bring your work home if you need to. Emma and I can keep you company while you figure it out. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes helps with these things." 2 hours later Robert walked through his front door carrying his laptop and a stack of printouts covered in error codes and system diagnostics. The house smelled like Catherine's famous pot roast, and he could hear Emma practicing piano in the living room. "Daddy," Emma called out when she heard him come in. She ran over and hugged his waist tightly. "Mrs. Walsh said you're having trouble with the computers at work." "That's right, sweetheart," Robert said, kneeling down to her level. "Sometimes grown-up problems are harder to solve than homework problems." Catherine appeared in the doorway wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Now then," she said, "let's get some food in you and then we can all sit together while you work." They ate dinner at the kitchen table with soft jazz playing from the old radio on the counter. Emma told them about her day at school and showed off her latest art project while Robert tried to push thoughts of crashing servers out of his mind. After dinner Catherine made tea for herself and Robert while Emma settled in with a book. Robert spread his papers across the dining room table and opened his laptop. The blue glow of the screen reflected off his tired face as he scrolled through lines of code. "What exactly is happening?" Catherine asked, sitting down beside him with her cup of tea. Robert explained how the system would run perfectly for exactly 30 minutes then crash without warning. "Every time," he said, "like something is telling it to shut down. We've checked the memory usage, the processing power, the network connections, everything." Catherine listened carefully, nodding as he spoke. Emma looked up from her book on the couch. "It sounds like our old washing machine," she said. "Remember, Mrs. Walsh, how it used to stop working after exactly one load?" Catherine smiled at Emma, then looked thoughtfully at Robert's computer screen. "That washing machine had a timer built into it," she said slowly. "A safety feature that would shut it down if it ran too long. The repairman said it was designed to prevent overheating." Robert looked up from his laptop. "A timer," he repeated. "But we didn't build any automatic shutdown timers into this system." Catherine leaned forward, studying the rows of code on the screen. "May I ask you something?" she said gently. "When you were testing this system before, did you ever run it for longer than 30 minutes? Robert thought back to the development process. They had done thousands of small tests but always in short bursts to save time and server resources. No, he realized, we always tested in small segments. The longest test runs were maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Catherine nodded as if this confirmed something she was thinking. Sometimes, she said, when children are acting out they're not trying to be difficult. They're trying to tell us something important. Maybe your computer system is trying to tell you something too. Emma had put down her book and was now sitting on the floor beside their chairs. What if there's a hidden timer somewhere, she suggested. Like when I set the timer on my phone to remind me to practice piano. Robert stared at his daughter then back at his laptop screen. A hidden timer, he said slowly. He began scrolling through different sections of the code looking for anything related to time limits or automatic shutdowns. Catherine watched over his shoulder, occasionally asking gentle questions about what different lines of code meant. 20 minutes later Robert stopped scrolling. There, he said, pointing at his screen. Deep in the system's security protocols was a line of code that set a 30-minute maximum session length. It had been added months ago as a temporary security measure during testing and then forgotten. But why didn't any of the engineers find this, Robert wondered aloud. Catherine smiled her knowing smile. Sometimes, she said, when we're looking too hard for complicated answers we miss the simple ones right in front of us. Those engineers know so much about computers that they were probably looking for very sophisticated problems. They didn't think to check for something as basic as a timer. Robert quickly made the necessary changes to remove the 30-minute limit. He uploaded the fix to their test servers and they all sat together watching the system monitor. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. At exactly 30 minutes and 30 seconds Robert let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The system was still running perfectly. You did it, Daddy, Emma said, jumping up and down. Robert looked at Catherine, who was smiling proudly but not seeming at all surprised. I don't know how to thank you, he said. You just solved a problem that 15 brilliant engineers couldn't figure out. Catherine patted his hand gently. Sometimes, the most important wisdom comes from the simplest observations, she said. Your engineers are very smart, but they were thinking like engineers. I was just thinking like someone who's seen a lot of things break down over the years. The next morning Robert called his entire engineering team together. He explained how the problem had been solved and made sure to give full credit to Catherine. Some of the younger engineers looked skeptical that their sophisticated problem had such a simple solution. But the senior engineers nodded with understanding and perhaps a bit of embarrassment. This is exactly the kind of thing we should have caught, said David Miller, the lead engineer. We were so focused on the complex possibilities that we ignored the basic ones. Robert stood up in front of the group. I want everyone to remember this moment, he said. Sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected sources. Catherine solved this problem not because she knows more about coding than any of you. She solved it because she approached it with fresh eyes and common sense. From now on, whenever we're stuck on a difficult problem, I want us to remember to step back and look for the simple explanations first. 2 weeks later the product launch went off without a single technical problem. Robert stood on the stage at the industry conference watching as their new hospital management system was demonstrated to hundreds of potential customers. In the audience he could see Catherine sitting in the front row wearing her best dress with Emma beside her. When Robert was introduced as the CEO who had personally solved the critical system crash, he made sure to tell the real story. The credit for solving our biggest challenge doesn't belong to me or even to our excellent engineering team, he said into the microphone. It belongs to Mrs. Catherine Walsh, who reminded us that sometimes the wisest solutions are also the simplest ones. The audience applauded politely, not quite understanding why a nanny was being credited with a technical breakthrough. But Robert didn't care what they thought. He knew the truth about where real wisdom comes from. After the presentation, Catherine and Emma joined Robert backstage. I'm so proud of you, Catherine said, giving him a warm hug. Not just for tonight but for remembering to give credit where it's due. That shows real character. Emma hugged his waist tightly. Can we go get ice cream to celebrate? She asked. I think that's a perfect idea, Robert said. As they walked out of the convention center together, Robert reflected on how much his life had changed since Sarah's death. He had been so focused on being both father and provider that he had forgotten to slow down and really listen. Catherine had taught him that sometimes the most valuable insights come from taking a step back and seeing problems with fresh eyes. She had also shown him that wisdom isn't always about having the most advanced knowledge. Sometimes it's about having the patience to ask simple questions and the humility to consider simple answers. The next Monday morning, Robert implemented a new policy at Harrison Tech. Every major project team now included at least one person from outside the engineering department. Customer service representatives, administrative assistants, and even maintenance staff were invited to review problems and offer their perspectives. The engineers grumbled at first, but after several breakthrough solutions came from unexpected sources, they began to embrace the approach. Catherine continued working as their nanny, but Robert also started asking her to consult on particularly challenging problems. She had a gift for cutting through complexity and finding the heart of issues. More importantly, she taught the entire company culture about the value of listening to different perspectives. Emma grew up watching this transformation in her father's company. She learned early that intelligence comes in many forms and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply ask the right question. Years later, when she was old enough to understand, she would tell people that her father's greatest business success came not from his technical skills or his leadership abilities. It came from his willingness to learn from a woman who had spent her life caring for children and understanding what really matters. Robert often thought back to that evening in his dining room when Catherine had solved their biggest problem with such gentle certainty. He remembered how she had listened carefully to his explanation, then asked simple questions that led to the answer. Most of all, he remembered the lesson that had shaped everything that came after. The most profound solutions often come from the most unexpected places, and the wisest insights are usually hiding in plain sight. All we have to do is slow down long enough to see them and humble enough to accept them. Catherine Walsh had given him more than just a solution to a computer problem. She had given him a new way of approaching challenges and a deeper appreciation for the wisdom that surrounds us every day. In a world that often values complexity and sophistication above all else, she had reminded him that sometimes the most powerful truth is also the simplest one. The best answers are often right in front of us, waiting patiently for someone with enough clarity to recognize them.